Sudan, 690 BCE.
You are ascending the staircase at Karnak. The column rises 26 meters. The sandstone is warm from the morning sun. Above you, the cartouche of Taharqa, king of Kush, Pharaoh of Egypt. Around you, two kingdoms spanning from the Nile headwaters to the Mediterranean, nearly 3,000 kilometers. The most powerful single ruler on earth at this moment is a man from Sudan. His name appears in the Bible. His face sits in the British Museum and the Louvre. He has ruled Egypt for 4 years. He will rule for 22 more.
This is the peak.
But here is what Egypt did with this man's name after he was gone. The Said pharaohs climbed scaffolding in temple after temple, Karnak, Luxor, Memphis, and they scraped. Carefully, methodically, not vandalism, policy, a damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory, applied to an entire dynasty based on where they came from. Taharqa's colonnade could not be unbuilt, but the man who ordered it built could be made officially to not exist. They worked for decades, and here is what that tells us. They were afraid of him. I'm Marcus. Today we're not following the king lists that left this dynasty out. We're following the chisel marks, the evidence of what was deliberately removed and what survived anyway. Before we follow that chisel, we need to go south. You are standing in northern Sudan at first light. The sand is the color of dried blood, and stretching out across the desert, further than seems reasonable, is a field of pyramids. Not Egypt, Sudan. They are too steep, too narrow by Egyptian standards. Egypt built approximately 138 pyramids across its entire history. This civilization built more than 200 and kept building for 700 years. The kingdom is called Kush, its final capital, Meroe. Roughly 1,500 years of continuous culture, from the first capital at Napata around 900 BCE to the Fall of Meroe around 350 CE. The entire Western Roman Empire lasted about 500 years. Kush outlasted it 3 times over. Almost no one outside the specialist literature knows it exists. Egyptian records first mention the people to the south around 2000 BCE. They called the region Ta Seti, the land of the bow, because Nubian archers were the finest in the ancient world. Egypt crushed the early Kushite kingdom of Kerma around 1550 BC. For 500 years, Nubia was a province. Then Egypt collapsed around 1070 BCE, and in that absence, Kushite chiefs at Napata did something that would define their civilization for 3 centuries. They became, in many ways, more Egyptian than the Egyptians. His name was Piye, king of Kush. Around 747 BCE, he marched north. Not as a raider. The account he left behind makes clear that Piye saw himself as a restorer. Egypt was fractured. Its princes had failed the gods. He was going to fix it. The record survives on a granite stele now in the Cairo Museum. Memphis fell. The princes of the Delta submitted one by one. Several were not permitted to enter the royal palace because they were uncircumcised. Piye, a Kushite king, enforcing Egyptian religious law on Egyptians in Egypt. The stele records one other detail. When Piye reached the stables of a defeated prince and found the horses thin from the siege, he wept. He had watched cities surrender. He does not record weeping for any of them. He wept for the horses. A man who had just conquered an empire, moved to tears by an animal's hunger. Whatever else you think of him, he is specific. He is there. The stele catches him in a moment that no one had reason to invent. Piye returned to Kush after the conquest. He died at Napata and was buried under a pyramid in the Nubian style. His horses were buried nearby in individual graves, honored as he had honored them in life. And then came Taharqa, 26 years at the apex of what was then the most powerful kingdom on earth. His colonnade at Karnak, his face on sphinxes in 3 continents, his name in the Book of Kings when the Assyrian army besieged Jerusalem. And then Esarhaddon arrived. 671 BCE. The Assyrian army was the most disciplined force in the ancient world at that moment. Taharqa fought. He lost Memphis. Dynasty 25 was over in Egypt after 90 years. The Saite pharaohs who came after inherited an Egypt the Kushites had stabilized. What happened next was not gratitude. The Saite pharaohs began a project historians call damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory. The Romans would later do it to disgraced emperors. The Saite did it to an entire dynasty, based on where they came from. Faces recarved on temple walls, inscriptions chiseled out. In the major king lists, Karnak, Abydos, Turin, the 25th dynasty appears incomplete, scrambled, or absent. Building works remained. You cannot unbuild a 26-meter colonnade, but the men who ordered them built had been made, officially, to not exist. The evidence of the erasure became the evidence of existence. We know about the Chisel Campaign because archaeologists noticed the chisel marks, the rough oval of missing stone where a face should be, the name intact in a cartouche beside a blank where a face was. The erasure was so methodical that its methodology is what survived, an archive of malice preserved in the stone it tried to destroy. They worked very hard, and the work is what tells us they failed. Erased twice, once by policy, once by time. But Kush did not end with the expulsion from Egypt. The Kushite kings moved their capital south to Meroe and continued for 900 more years. They traded, forged iron on an industrial scale, conducted diplomacy with Rome. Around 300 BCE, Meroitic scribes developed their own writing system. 23 signs, an isolate with no known relatives in any language family. They spoke. We can repeat the sounds. The meaning is gone. Francis Griffith cracked the alphabet in 1909. After Griffith, anyone trained in the system could sit down with a Meroitic inscription and read it aloud. Every syllable, every word. We have been doing this for more than a century. Thousands of inscriptions, funerary texts, royal dedications, temple walls. We understand almost none of them. No Rosetta Stone exists, no related language to triangulate from. This is the second erasure, not by policy, by the silence of time. In 25 BCE, Rome arrived. Augustus had just annexed Egypt. Rome now shared a border with Meroe at Aswan. The Meroitic response was led by a Kandake, a ruling queen. Her name was Amanirenas. Her forces seized the Roman border town of Aswan, decapitated Roman statues, and carried the trophies south. The Meroitic priests then made a decision that is one of the most precisely contemptuous acts I have encountered in ancient history. They did not melt the bronze head of Augustus down. They buried it beneath the threshold of a victory temple at Meroe, face down, in the dirt below the entrance. You are standing at the threshold of that temple, 25 BCE. You step inside. Every priest, every worshipper, every king who entered stepped over the face of Rome's emperor. Every day, for however long the temple stood. The head sits today in the British Museum, room 70, one of the finest surviving portraits of Augustus anywhere in the world. Amanirenas sent envoys to Rome. The outcome? Favorable treaty terms, tribute demands waived. The peace held for 300 years. The end came around 350 CE, not from Rome, from the south. The kingdom of Aksum, in what is now northern Ethiopia, had been growing for centuries. Its king, Ezana, left inscriptions recording his campaigns. One reached the Nile and destroyed the Kushite capital. The iron forges went cold. The inscriptions stopped. The city emptied. In a city the world had already mostly forgotten. Here is what I cannot stop thinking about. Kush was erased first by Egyptian policy, then by the quiet accumulation of whose archives got read. Scholars trained in Egyptology studied Egypt. Sudan offered no connection to the Greek and Latin texts that shaped the discipline. Meroe became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2011. But the broader public conversation about what ancient civilization means has barely shifted. How many Meroes are there? How many civilizations reached this scale, left this much evidence, and are still waiting in the gap between specialist scholarship and common knowledge? In London, the bronze head of Augustus sits in room 70 of the British Museum. Found at Meroe, the label mentions the temple threshold. What it cannot quite convey is the pleasure, the precision of burying a conqueror's face in the dirt beneath your door. And today, in the British Museum and the Louvre, the face the Saite pharaohs spent decades chiseling from temple walls stares back at anyone who looks. You can chisel a face out of stone, but a sphinx is harder to hide. If that question stays with you, how many civilizations like this one are we still forgetting? Leave it in the comments. I read them. I'm Marcus. See you among the ruins.